I used to be able to buy a house from the guy who moved to Florida.
Right.
That guy isn't moving right now.
Well, also Canada is not an option because we're buying it. So you
Right.
you can't go there anymore. So the 51st state's out, right? So you can't go to Greenland.
Nope.
Can't go to Canada anymore.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Did I just do that?
No. Yeah, it's fine. Mike's like, how do I get out of here?
You talk about it privately. We talk about it publicly. This is the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered Podcast. Welcome again to the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered Podcast. I'm your host, Dwiggy, along with Keith Robinson. I don't know why I just want to change that up for you.
It's Crazy Uncle Keith, first of all, get it right.
Crazy Uncle Keith on the show. We had a repeat guest, Mike Simonsen, founder and president of Altos Research. You are a fanboy of his.
He's one of my go-to when it comes to all things economics. His webinars are amazing. He talks about, first of all, just shameless plug, but he's got a bad economy seller blog post that is super interesting and worth the read. He shares his views on listing inventory rising, how the migration effect is changing some of the things in the Northeast and the Southeast and Southwest. And it's a different story than I've heard anywhere else. We really dug in on the hyperlocal nature of real estate. And then his thoughts on this sort of stay ready concept that I've been preaching to anyone who will listen. It was a great conversation. He has so much data at his fingertips and at the forefront of his brain. There's no way this conversation couldn't provide value for you. Put it in your ears, kids.
Mike, welcome back to the podcast.
Yes.
We are excited to have you to sort through all the lack of knowledge and information and drama and statistics happening in the world of residential real estate.
And I'm like nerding out because not too long ago we had Logan on, and then now we have Mike on. So like I feel like I'm at the altar of the oracles that I follow. So I'm super excited.
He gets
always
really
great to be here, guys.
Yeah. No, we're excited. We're excited to have you. So there are no shortage of headlines. We're recording this and there's all sorts of drama. I'm sure we'll get into some of that today. And for those of you, by the way, who don't know Mike, we'll put a link to the first time he was on the pod to get a little bit of background there. That's why we're not going to do the quick rundown of background and the rapid fires. So let's dive right in. You've got a post recently, bad economy sellers. Can you unpack that for us in the charts and data? Like let's just get into the nitty gritty here.
Yeah. So, the thing that's happening right now in March, for the first time in years, is that we're starting to see more listings. Like each week, more sellers. Like the seller volume is picking up. It's like we've been in the post-pandemic era with ultra low new listings each week. Very few sellers. People are locked in or they're holding back and they're not listing. So it's now starting to get back to the old normal levels of listings each week. How many sellers each week? So, and so the question is why? Where are they coming in? Why are they coming now? So, there's a couple of reasons that I'm speculating on. Like we counted 70,000 new listings this week. This last year, it was like 58,000 the same week a year ago. So like there's more sellers now. Mm-hmm. So where are they coming from? One place they may be coming from is like, these are folks who've been like sitting on the sidelines for 3 years and they're finally now like going, okay, I can't wait any longer. Now my kid is 18 months old or whatever the thing is. And they've been waiting. The other new variable right now is a real shift in the sentiment about the economy. So the Conference Board data just came out today, and the consumer view of future employment is at a 12-year low, right? So people are suddenly so these are variables we haven't had in a long time. Like I'm worried. We haven't had unemployment for years.
Yeah, it's wild. Country. Like, why are people worried when unemployment is like
it's still very low, right?
Still very low.
Unemployment is still very low,
and incomes are up, right? So that's a weird combo.
and so we've been employed for a bunch of years, right? Unemployment's been very low. The labor market's been weird because even though unemployment's low, companies are not hiring very quickly. And so I am worried if I move from Albany to Orlando, I'm worried about getting a job, right? Because nobody's hiring on the other side. So we've stopped moving. And so we've stopped moving from the north to the south. And that's why there's a lot less inventory in the north and a lot more inventory in the south right now. So back to the original question, why am I speculating? Are we seeing the first bad economy sellers? So are these folks,
for those who couldn't see those, was an air quote bad economy sellers?
Yeah, well, because it's vibes. It's a vibe shift, right? Is what it is, right?
Yeah,
and this would be the earliest of those folks who are saying, anecdotally, is like, should I get out before it gets worse? Should I unload that house? Maybe it's an investment property, or maybe it's whatever the things are around the margins. And so I'm speculating, like, is that what's driving finally some increase in seller volume this spring? That's the new variable, right? Everybody still has their cheap mortgages. Mortgage rates haven't gone up or down dramatically. That's not changing. The thing that's changing is potentially this like vibes on where the economy is going.
Yeah. And that could lead people to be a contributor to the decision. Let's put our house on the market. We were hanging around. We were waiting. I had these other external forces that were pushing on it. And oh, by the way, the economy could be slowing down. So let's do this now.
Yeah, I have my house in Sarasota. We use it 3 weeks out of the year. It's insurance is up anyway. I've been thinking of selling.
Right.
Maybe I should get out now before it gets worse. Yeah. And so it's a little bit of speculation on my part, but it's like, what is driving that? What's new right now that's driving that supply up each week, right? Each week is higher than a year ago. And so that's really what I'm looking for there. And I mean, it's a notable trend, right? Like, more sellers each week. We're finally breaking out of the pandemic, the post-pandemic era, the shortage of inventory. Yeah. And by the end of the year, I think we'll have, unsold inventory will be back at 2019 levels across the country.
That was going to be my question, because I feel like so much of when people are trying to get headlines and clickbait, the inventory is up some insane percentage. Well, it's because we didn't have any, right? We were so low in inventory. So you almost have to look pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and pull pre-pandemic numbers if you're going to try to anchor into some sort of reality, right? Because the pandemic created this massive distortion event in all the data. So where is the supply side? And sorry, this is a question that I think at the forefront of your brain naturally, but if you don't, no problem. But on the supply side, where are we compared to pre-pandemic levels? We're not there yet, but we're close.
We're getting close, and we will be there. We will be at 2019 levels at the end of the year, by the end of the year. So in 20, in the last decade, the 2010s, inventory was falling every year. Rates were low. We were buying more and holding more real estate. So inventory kept falling. And that accelerated dramatically when rates fell, in 2020 through the pandemic. So post-pandemic, rates are up. Inventory is up each year. Inventory is 30% higher now than a year ago. So there's 30% more homes on the market unsold than a year ago.
There's that headline, that clickbaity headline, right? 30% inventory is up.
Well,
30%,
and 30%. I mean, it's meaningful. It's not catastrophic, but it is notable that inventory is climbing, and it is. And it looks like
but the prices are still going up too, though, right? Although it'll be a little bit slower.
A lot slower.
So prices are at a point now where they're looking flat at best, and there are 5 states now where home prices are negative year over year.
All in the Southeast?
No, South and West. So
South and West.
It's Texas, but also like Washington and Florida is just barely positive.
Like anywhere that had massive acceleration, is seeing the deceleration now going into this year. The thing that I want to double click on, though, really quick before we go further is I don't remember anyone freaking out about inventory levels in 2018 and 2019.
That's right.
Right. So like,
yeah, it was already low.
Right. When you hear 30% increase pre-pandemic, right, for over last year, but we're almost back to pre-pandemic levels. Pre-pandemic, nobody was freaking out about inventory. There was like, oh my God, we have too many houses. What are we going to do?
Because everybody freaks out about everything and they forget about everything.
I am the voice of reason in residential real estate. Right. That's my job.
Everybody in 2021 was like, oh my God, I'm working too much.
There's not enough houses.
There's just so much to do. And
hey, Goldilocks, right? The porridge is never just right. But I do want people to remember, no one was freaking out about inventory levels pre-pandemic. No one thought the crash was coming. No one thought this was going to be the end of the world. When you have massively low inventory for a myriad of reasons, and then it starts to come back, that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
I think in generally it's a good thing. And it's a good thing because it's selection for buyers.
Yes.
It's a good thing because it will keep a cap on price appreciation, which we have an unaffordable situation here. The multi-years with a cap on appreciation while incomes rise helps solve the affordability crisis.
Well, everybody's forecasts have been, I shouldn't say I haven't looked at yours, but most everybody's forecasts over the past few years have been just completely wrong. And for good reason, because nobody can predict anything. We don't know what's going to happen from one month to the next. But are you feeling more optimistic about existing home sale numbers now this year? Are you like, where's your brain at with that?
So the existing home sales numbers have been negative year over year through last week.
Right.
This week was the first week where home sales, our weekly pending home sales. So we count pending home sales every week, and it's the first week that it had about a 2.3% increase year over year. So I think we are finally in a moment where the year over year prints will be growth over 2024. And the reason is last year, second quarter, was when rates were on their way up to 7.5%. And so things were slowing in the second and third quarter in particular last year. And so if we're lucky and rates continue to notch down now, we have the opposite, we have the opposite momentum going. And so, we forecasted at Housing Wire, we forecasted that the year would see about 5% home sales growth over 2024. Go from 4 million to 4.2 million.
That's what Keith and I are roughly.
Yeah.
But through, 12 weeks of the year, it's been fewer. We've had fewer home sales. So we've got to have that growth, has to start coming in order for that forecast to make sense. The big variable, there's two big variables. So of course, mortgage rates, right? And, rates started the year higher than anybody expected. They stayed there longer. They started to ease down, but they're kind of bouncing around at, 6.6 or 6.7 now, and not really falling right now.
But in some ways, isn't that, I'm not a chartologist, right? I don't think that's a word, but don't you need, it's healthy when the market takes a drop and then stays there a while, because you create the new floor or ceiling depending on which direction
I believe
that
consumers are more sensitive to changes in rates than the absolute levels.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And we've had a lot of volatility in the last, 150 basis points of volatility in the year, and so if we settle in and things are at, 6.6, the 6.5 for the whole year, I believe that alone will result in growth.
Is that the number? Is that
6.5? Yeah.
6.5. That's your number.
What I noticed was, so last year when we came down from 7.5 to 6.5, we didn't really move the needle. As it got closer to 6 in September, that's when we could see sales kick up, and we could see actually prices ticked up in the second half of the year, and it was closer to 6 than it was 6.5. But if it just stays stable,
right.
And it doesn't go from 6 and jump to 7.25 and then back down, and the stability will result, I believe, in some sales growth. You know how to plan, and you know what you're budgeting for, and The sky isn't falling. Like all of those things start to come in. It makes it easier to do.
And it's not a light switch, it's a dimmer switch, right? Like, so meaning, I guess a dimmer switch is technically a light switch, but you get my point with the analogy. It's not like it
kept going. Nobody would notice that comment.
Yeah, I know. It's not like at 6.5, everybody just goes, oh, it's time, let's go, right? But they start to reconnect. I mean, I went back while you were talking, Mike, and looked up January and February of 2024, and rates had got down to like 6.6, 6.7, right around where we are now, but they stayed there for January, February, March, right? And so you had a lower rate than previous, and it stayed there for 60, 90 days. Well, that enables more I'm not surprised that this year, because we started the year at 7, I'm not surprised that this year hasn't had the same transaction as the first few months of last year, because you're half a point off in rate. And it seems like the alarm bells start to go off for the dimmer switch, to keep my analogies coherent. The dimmer switch starts to change at 6.5. And then so long as we stay between 6.5 and 6, the buyers come back, and they come back meaningfully.
I think so. And yeah, we really noticed it, in like we were briefly touched around 6 last September.
Right.
And that gave transaction momentum like October and November.
Was ripping.
It was really interesting, even though rates bounced a little bit after that.
Back to 7.
There was a little bit. Yeah. So, so that was, so I think we have two things. So we have, like, that's a way to look at rates. So there's two sides there. There is stability. And then, if we get lucky and rates slide below 6.5, I think, getting closer to 6 is when you'll really see the needle move. The other variable, though, we have right now is this like economy variable.
Right.
So we've had in the past 3 years, you could see momentum when rates fell a little bit. You could see the brakes hit hard when rates jumped, jumped over 7, jumped over 8, like really hit the hard brakes. But during that time, everybody was employed. We still had a lot of COVID cash. So nobody was worried about those things. We weren't worried about the future. There were, the peak of the Biden inflation. There was some worry in that moment, but it wasn't really worry about my job.
Right.
And so,
So that sentiment's changed, is what
that sentiment's changing. It's a new variable for home buyers this year, right? It's and so we haven't had that variable in 15 years, right? There hasn't been unemployment in the country for 3 weeks in 2020, but
other than that, we got to go back to 07, 08, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a new variable, and so it might, if the year goes on, and we get lucky and rates slide down, I think we will see that picks up. But if that's coinciding with unemployment rising, or if rates are falling because, the economy is shrinking due to tariffs or whatever.
Sure. Or consumer confidence, or job loss, or some combination of the three.
It's a new variable that we have to deal with this year.
Well, Keith says this a lot, which it makes sense to me. Like we've been in a recession. Real estate's been in a recession for years,
3 years,
and it's a balancing act. Like it sounds horrible to say, we kind of want a recession, a little like a small recession to happen to get these rates down and move things, but then it's also, if we go too far. So I this is kind of a follow-up, just because it's related. You mentioned it. Talk to us about tariffs, and it seems to be that there's a lot of volatility, but they're getting more precise, and so Wall Street's kind of responding less negatively from one day to the next. It just depends upon the moment in time. And I guess the tweet, which Keith always says, by the way, stop reading tweets, just wait for the policy to come out. But
I can't forecast on tweets. I can only forecast on policy. You can read whatever you want to, knock yourself out, but just don't ask me what it means, because I can't forecast on tweets.
But talk to us about that.
Yeah. So, I think there's very little debate that, tariffs are a degrowth policy, and the bigger the tariffs, the bigger the hit on the economy. I think that's, so if they want to do tariffs for other purposes, then maybe they will do tariffs for other, but the market.
The argument short term, long term, the idea is that it's bringing more
Right. Right. Exactly. So, but you can see that and that's like the argument, right? Even though the evidence,
I'm not taking a side, just adding context.
Yeah. So
it's a podcast. It's way more interesting when we take sides, James. So please feel free.
But as you point out, like we don't know anything until we see an implementation, right?
Right.
So maybe it grows the economy in the long term. Who knows?
But I do think I'll have an opinion on this. The tariff, what I'll call two-step / consternation, tariffs on, tariffs off, maybe more, maybe less, going to be April 1st, April 2nd, we'll see. That is part of why we've seen downward pressure on rates, I think, right? I think the bond market is responding to some of these things. In my opinion, and I don't know, Trump doesn't call me before he makes any decisions.
Not yet.
Probably not ever. Primarily is like that these changes are, he has been on record, him and his administration has been on record that they want lower interest rates, right? And I think he's using tariffs as a negotiation ploy and is getting an ancillary benefit of it's putting some downward pressure on rates prior to Fed cuts and anything else. Because the other important thing to remember is we're getting all this without any participation at all from the Fed, right? The Fed is not doing rate cuts. They're not talking about more rate cuts. A little bit. They're a little more flirty with rate cuts in this last session than previously, but rates are moving on their own without much involvement from the Fed.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're being generous, but that's my.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that's all right. Well, I mean, if you want to take the other side, feel free.
I do think we can look back at the last trade war, right? So in 2018 and 2019, we had the economy slowing, and so in 2018 rates went up, inventory rose, home sales fell, like it slowed down 2018. So we can see there were more homes on the market at the start of 2019 than 2018, and that was the first time all year or all decade because of rising rates. Then in 2019, trade war was heating up, and the Fed was had to cut rates to get to try to save the economy from trade war.
Yeah.
When we walked into 2020, now rates were already falling from trade war stuff, and then had to drop the bottom out to zero to hit crisis. And so, I think that's exactly a cycle that we could see. We see, well, whatever the policies are that slow the economy, the Fed's like, well, we're trying to counteract those policies and fix the economy. So I think those are possible scenarios.
Yeah.
In the last few weeks, rates have been climbing, and the 10-year has not, like, it's moving.
It's not moved.
It's the yields are heading up a little bit. So it's really fascinating. I think one of the good news is, when we look at payments, like, and so we do like what does an average mortgage payment, which is like a median home price and the current rates, payments are now below last year at this time. And so, slightly below last year at this time, because rates were on their way up last year, and home prices haven't really moved. Home prices are maybe 1% more, than last year at this time. So, with a little bit of luck, it's a consumer benefit, home buyer benefit this year.
Yes. All right. I'm going to try to get us back on track, because I think we asked one of the questions we had written down, and now we're 20 minutes in. You've talked a lot about the data that you track. Can you just not that it's possible that someone doesn't know Altos, who they are and what they do, and the great and powerful Mike Simonsen, but talk to us a little bit about what you focus on in the data, because I watch a lot of your webinars that you do, and thank you for doing that work for the industry. We'll put a link so people can register or learn more into the show notes. But what data points do you focus? Give us just a little bit of the secret sauce. Like, what are the key data points you track?
We track the active housing market, every home for sale in the country every week, all the weekly pending sales, all the supply and demand, all the changes in that data. So traditional housing data is like, these houses sold last month. And there is so much signal in the active market. 34.3% of the homes on the market have taken a price cut. Like that is a signal of future sales. Houses on the market now doesn't get an offer. It does a price cut. So it gets an offer in April that closes in May. So the traditional view on housing data is in June, you're talking about that, right? But we can see that right now. And so for buyers and sellers, right? It's like, hey, the median price of the home sold in your town was $575,000 last month. And you go like, oh, there isn't anything on the market less than 6 right now.
So what are we doing?
The active market is a powerful way to communicate with buyers and sellers. And it gives us signals about what's going to happen in the future.
Well, it's sort of like, go ahead, James.
I'm sorry, you just triggered a thought.
No, it's all right.
James
is triggered.
A lot of shit triggers me these days. You're using MLS data?
That we use, it's all our Altos data, is all our own data, all our own analytics.
Well, let me just ask you this question then, because this is a common debate in the industry right now. There's obviously a lot of conversation around, data on MLS, off MLS. I'm not going to get into those specifics, but I guess my sort of a comment or statement, how are we supposed to look at this and give more insight and knowledge if we're restricting transparency to housing data? Like, I feel like we're going backwards with some of the conversations we're having. As an analyst, what's your thought on this? Like,
I would say, to me, it looks absolutely like we're going backwards. I think it's worse for the consumer. It's worse for everybody in the space except for the guy who's got the listings he's not showing anybody else. I used to say that when I started Altos, like the U.S. housing market is so messed up that we have to we have to exist, because in a perfectly functioning market, like everybody, like you wouldn't need an Altos to come along and go, here's what the market is doing. Like, here's all the data. The data didn't exist before Altos came along. But in most of the world is even more messed up.
Right.
Like Altos couldn't exist in France because you got to know the guy who's got the listing, and he's got the listing because his dad had the listings, like that kind of thing. So in most of the world, is even more messed up. And so, it is those current trends, a lot of those current trends remind me of like going to the lesser functioning markets around the world.
Right. Yeah, regressing, not progressing.
We're talking about data in your analysis to help people make informed decisions, and my back of my brain, I'm going, we're moving the wrong direction in conversations today. Like, I don't know how do we do that if we're trying to go back 30 years?
Yeah, and it's you can make I'm going to try to optimize the profits for my company, but that's in my view, it's a short term. That's a short-term strategy where, if it's long-term, not helping the industry, like not helping your clients do better, it feels to me like weaker long-term, but
Yeah, you can't drive profits at the detriment to your client. That's a short
not over the long term.
Not over the long term. That's right.
I didn't mean to take us off track. You were talking about data and just made me think about the fact that I don't know how we do it if these things are continuing to happen the way they are. But all right, Keith, take us back on track.
Sure. No, that's a good question. Okay. You look at a lot of stuff all the time. What are you most surprised by in the data that you're looking at right now? What are you like where your eyebrows go up? Could be good surprises, bad surprises. But what are you most surprised by in the data?
So a couple of things come to mind. One, right now, the new listings are climbing, right? And they haven't climbed. And so that is a new trend really starting in March of this year that's, breaking several years of trends. So that's notable. And we talked about why that might be. The other thing that's really fascinating right now is the north to south migration in the country. So overall, there are 30% more homes for sale on the market than a year ago. But Connecticut has like 80% fewer, not than last year. Connecticut is still has 80% fewer homes on the market than 2019. 80% fewer.
Why?
Because so in general,
Yeah.
what we've been doing in Connecticut and upstate New York and, a lot of the Rust Belt, what we've been doing over the last many years is moving from Connecticut to Florida.
Right.
And as it's gotten expensive to move, expensive for mortgage rates, expensive to, insurance.
Yeah.
We're moving less. So we're not selling our house in Connecticut and we're not buying in Florida. Inventory in Florida is up and therefore we're not, and there's an inventory in Connecticut is down. So you're coming out of college in Connecticut and you're like, oh, I want to buy a house. I used to be able to buy a house from the guy who moved to Florida.
Right.
That guy isn't moving right now. And so their inventory is super tight. And so we've really slowed that migration pattern down for the last few years. And so all of the inbound migration states, Colorado is up and Arizona and, all of those.
When you say up in inventory.
Up in inventory. Yep. And
also Canada is not an option because we're buying it. So you can't go there anymore. So the 51st state's out, right?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny, but like,
ancillary effects, Keith, right? So you can't go to Greenland.
No.
Can't go to Canada anymore. So
God. Yeah.
Did I just do that?
No, that's fine. Mike's like, how do I get out of here?
That's right. Well, one of the other things that, we haven't even talked about is immigration changes.
Right.
And so there's another thing that really is a new factor. It is inbound immigration, whether you like it or not, has added to the economic growth in the last few years.
For sure.
And so we take it out. And so it's a degrowth policy.
Yep.
Some of the heavy immigration cities, like the inbound immigration cities like San Antonio, that's one that I'm watching this year because at the margins, housing demand, rental demand, what shifts there. And in San Antonio, there's already a lot of inventory. So those are interesting things to keep our eyes on this year.
Do you think that the feds or the government, I know it's a big headline, but we have to get to the data, but the trimming of the federal workforce, is that going to have a meaningful impact in your opinion at some point, or is that still on the margins?
So in the DC market, we can see new listings climbing a little bit in DC. Inventory is still pretty tight in DC. The big scare headlines about DC aren't true, but we're definitely watching that, right? Yeah. Unemployment is definitely climbing in the DC metro, and therefore, like that likely to add to inventory. It's likely to then put a lid on prices. Like those are. If you crash the DC economy, the housing market will likely follow. It's not that big a market, surprisingly, to really move the needle for the whole country. So, there's 700 new listings or something like that, right? It's, and it goes to 770, that's a 10% growth, but it's 70 more houses.
Can I add on top, just as we're bringing this up, Keith? I'm sorry, just taking me off track here, but
our pod. Knock yourself out.
I know, but I'm just totally taking us off track.
That's okay.
Well, you mentioned immigration policy, both in and then obviously slowing, which is what the government's trying to do. Does this factor? Are you thinking long term about inventory if we continue to have birth rates dropping in the United States plus lack of immigration that we actually close this gap faster on not enough inventory? Is that something you guys are paying any attention to?
So, yes, I think it is a legitimate angle. It's second half of the decade, right? It is a multi-year thing. So yes, I think that's could be dramatic. We have been underbuilding and, so what happens is, those numbers, immigration and birth rates, ease down, and therefore we build even less. Those could be results, and so we end up with not that much growth in there. And really, birth rates now it's a 20-year home purchase kind of horizon. But I think those are real vectors, but they're longer term.
Sorry, just you mentioned it, and that was just relevant.
No,
One
question.
person's brought this up, which is Ivy Zellman, and she's talked about it multiple times. And so, just curious if you're watching those on the margins as well. So.
Yeah.
Shifting gears just a little. One of the mantras I've been talking to the agents in our company about is this sort of concept of stay ready. That I think the 2025 market is a market where you just have to be. You're going to get, hopefully you get 8 months where you can have robust transactions, but we might only get 2 months where we hit that sweet magic spot between 6.5 and 6 and are bouncing around in there for 60 or 90 days. So first, do you agree with that assessment that sort of we need to be staying ready? We got to be locked in. You've got to be present. You've got to be watching Mike's webinars, right? So that when you see the window, you're actively changing your behavior to take advantage of it. If you agree with that, if you don't agree with that assessment, let's debate it. But if you do agree with that assessment, how would you advise an agent to stay ready today? What approach would you take?
There are a couple things I noticed. So last year, when rates briefly dipped to close to 6%, that motivated buyers off the fence. There were a lot of folks who weren't ready and missed a refi window. There are those. And because it's like we all sort of assume that rates will be falling, but rates could be higher, right? They could go up from here. Like, we don't know anything. Nothing. I'm not convinced anybody can predict rates.
Right.
And so they could go higher, right? So you don't know what the window is. So in that sense, and like it was a few weeks window, that was the real window of opportunity, but it actually had a couple of months of increase in home sales and support on prices last year, and so in that sense, ready to jump when that happens.
Right?
Yeah. But I also think in the rising sellers, that story, more new listings each week. And as that rises, I think a message for potential home sellers is there's nothing in the data that says it's going to get easier for you later in the year. So, we can see that the seller volume is kicking up. We know that unsold inventory is climbing. There's no like upward price pressure. So like waiting, to get a higher price, like none of those things are in the data. So being ready to help somebody in that sense, like if you're thinking about it in 2025, the signal is, sooner looks better than later. And so I think those opportunities are probably out there for helping people understand what's going on.
All right. I'm struck by something in this conversation. I scribbled it in my notes. It keeps coming back to real estate as hyperlocal. And I mean, the story about San Antonio, the story about Connecticut, right? Like at the end of that's the power of the real estate professional. It's something we should never lose sight of. So talk a little bit about the hyperlocal nature of residential real estate. And then because I'm getting better at this podcast thing, that's also, you have a tool that I think you could talk about that shows some hyperlocal data for people who are trying to figure out how to get ready. So tell us a little bit about that too, because I've looked at it extensively and I think it's really powerful. So hyperlocal nature of real estate, and then your tool for assessing that.
Yeah. So, there are, we can see, we know inventory is up, but we know that it's not up everywhere evenly. We know that the DC, economy could be slowing, but, I just saw one of our Altos clients has posted that, they had 14 offers on a house, in DC, like there are those, there's plenty of that activity happening. There are, some price points in some markets that you don't want to be in. Right now we can see that, condo inventory is actually growing faster than single family homes. And Florida
is
has
normally the case. Condos will slow down faster, or inventory will grow faster.
I think that's not uncommon. And you can see it part of it is that like 20% of all the condos in the country are in Florida.
Right.
And Florida is like the roughest market right now. So, so you can see that those are all of those factors are meaningful. We count in our data, we call it immediate sales. So these are the houses that get listed and then go into contract essentially immediately.
Yeah.
And there were 14,000 of those last week around the country. So those are going into contract, and we do everything, once a week. We track the whole country once a week and do all that. And so these are ones that are in contract before they were, like listed for a day or a couple of days before and now they're pending. And so, there's still, 14,000 of those. Now it was last year, it was, 16 or 17,000. And, during the boom years, it was a lot more than that. But there's still, the right property at the right price,
it's always that.
It's always that.
Yeah.
So then, how do we do it? So at Altos, what we do is, we track the whole housing market everywhere in the country, every zip code in the country. And then we bundle up the Altos system is really market reports with your name on it for your clients. So they know what what's happening in the housing market right now. It comes out every week. It's super local. It's got the price points. So the high end of the market may be behaving differently from the low end. All of those things are what's in the Altos data. And the
product's called "We Make You Look Like a Badass."
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Or your answer to howsthemarket.com.
How's the market? Yeah. Right? Oh, how's the market? You're like, yeah. Nobody wants to hear you say it's great.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There was a real estate trainer out there once who used to go everywhere, all over the country, saying, "Just tell them it's incredible." Because they don't have to know if it's incredibly good or incredibly bad. And I just wanted to throw my chair at his head.
Yeah, I was at a comedy show last week, and the comedian asked one of the ladies up front what you do, and she's like, "Oh, I'm a realtor." And I'm just going, "Oh God." He goes, "How's the market?" She goes, "It's great." He goes, "Yeah, you're definitely a realtor." Like just deadpan. I was just like, "Yep, yeah."
I would go on stage when I started Altos. I started Altos in 2006. And I would go on stage at an event in 2008, 2009, and I would say, "How's the market?" And there'd be 1,000 realtors in that room, and they would go, "It's great." And I was like, "All right, the title of this talk is how to use data to help one of your clients." And when I ask you, "How's the market?" You say it's 2008, and they're saying it's great.
Yeah.
So the answer is, how's the market? Well, let me tell you. Do you know that there's still 80% fewer homes for sale now?
Get the data.
It's you answer with the data. And could you imagine that comedian if you're like, "How's the market?" Well, there's 16 condos for sale here in San Francisco.
I would have killed his comedy show. Yeah.
You grab the mic from him and
pick me. I'll do this. Yeah.
Start giving a real estate economic update.
That's right.
All right.
I've looked at your local market reports. I use it for some investing analytics that I do. They're the best I've found. They're amazing. Thank you for doing the work. We'll put a link in the show notes for anyone who wants to learn more about those. Mike, thanks for being on and sharing your thoughts with us on where we are in time and space. It's as difficult an economic market to navigate as any in my 26 years that I've been paying attention. So thanks for being a lighthouse that in the noise that can help us try to figure this out.
You bet. I appreciate you both.
Yeah.
You as well, my friend. Keep up the amazing work. So we need all that transparency. Just gonna leave it there. All right, my friend.
Right.
We'll have you back soon.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it. We need you to subscribe to this podcast because you need us to keep saying the things that nobody else will say out loud.